up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Moving with Life. Andy here, hoping you all are having a good, for me it's still a weekend Saturday, so this won't be up till later, but I was in my headspace where I'm like, I feel like I need to record something today. Or maybe I felt good enough to, the headspace was in podcast. I watched a couple podcasts today and watching them converse and just go through their, the main podcasts that I watch are Fighter and the Kids. Well, now it's Fighter and the Kids. So it's Brendan Schaub. Used to be with Brian Callen, but now it's Brendan Schaub, Malik. It's Malik B. I forgot his last name, and then Chappelle Lacey. They're all comedians. Primarily, Brendan Schaub used to be in the UFC. That's his before he got into comedy, or as I guess as he was transitioning into comedy, he was in the UFC first. The other two, for the most part, I know that's mostly comedy, and so I was watching them. And who else did I watch? I think I listened to a little bit of Jocko, but I didn't finish the. I'm still on one of the episodes. I'm catching up on his most recent ones where he's doing several pieces with Dave Burke and Echo Charles. So I was doing that. Anyways, so I did mention in the last podcast that I am reading the book, The Talent War. And so I finished chapter 4 this morning before I went for my work, before I left for my workout. Yeah, chapter 4. And it's interesting because I'm just going to read literally just a passage from chapter 4. It's like a quote and then a small paragraph, so it's not much, but with that, it made me think, because I was like, I feel like I can relate to that. I can, and I'll get into what those relations are, and I frankly I don't know how long this is gonna go, but I could relate to this particular section of the chapter, and man, that's I feel that way too. I feel like that's what characterizes me the best, in all the things that I've learned and done up to this point, as far as just once I graduated high school, and then what I've done the past 10 years, 11 years now. And so I'm gonna read the passage real quick, and then I'll get into just my tie-ins, and then we'll go from there. Everybody wants to be a specialist, says Brian Decker. It's not enough to be an ear doctor. I've got to be a left ear doctor. The problem is that's not how special operations soldiers are trained. We're generalists. We all have some degree of specialty, but it's the ability to work broadly across a wide range of functions that makes us special. Everyone is a product of their education and life experience. As generalists, we draw upon a vast range of experiences to gain insight into complex problems. If you want to hire the best talent, look at experience related to their character. Do they have past experience that shows drive, resiliency, or adaptability? Have they proven themselves a good leader, or have they shown that they can work as part of a team? So that's literally the main little passage that really set a mark for me today, that I was like, listen to other podcasts today, and reading that this morning, that was the first thing I did this morning, was I read, because I feel like I'm behind. I'm not really behind, but I feel like I'm behind. So the first thing I did this morning when I woke up was read a little bit, and then went about my day. But in reading that passage, I was like, that I feel drawn to that, because I've talked about it with Brian. I don't know if we talked about it specifically, on the podcast, but we've definitely talked about it. I'm gonna assume it's come up on the podcast, but I've always felt drawn to do things. When I was young, my parents always had me in an activity, and it mostly was sports. All time, baseball, football, basketball when I was a kid, and so I was always just doing something, but it was the principles and the character, that we're talking about here. It's all the same. The principles are the same, but they're different sports. So different. Now, tying in this section to what I've done in the past 10, 11 years is, I went to school I went to school, actually, I don't know if I told this part. Anyways, I went to college I started off as a music major, and I didn't like classical music. I didn't like the direction, so I was like, eh. But I knew I wanted to go, I went to A&M Corpus, and that's where I wanted to go for school, and that was that. So I changed my degree, and I got out of the music program, did that, and then I started kinesiology because I was like, physical therapy. There's a lot of things that I always tied in physical therapy to athletics. Getting hurt, and then recovery. You go to physical therapy for recovery, especially after you have a surgery, or if you get hurt, very seriously injured, you get physical therapy after the surgery, after you have to have it in the cast, whatever the situation may be. I'm like, I could do that, because then I started thinking big picture too. I was like, if I become a physical therapist, or if I do that education wise, I then could make it. I could try to get a job with the Major League Baseball. And I was like, imagine working for the Rangers or the Astros. That's pretty cool. So I started with that, but then my GPA was like, it was average at best. I mean, I graduated, so I had enough credentials and credibility to get a diploma. But I'll never forget my advisor, the physical therapy / kinesiology advisor. She's like, your GPA is too low. You might want to think about other options, and something around those words. And I was like, okay. Then I'll just not do it. And at that time, like I was so quick to make decisions that it's like, okay, this person says I should consider other options, so I'll just do that now. I won't even waste time, because at that point I felt like I had to waste time. Going from music to kinesiology, there was a space there where I did take I took a little break and whatnot, and then I jumped back in, started kinesiology, so on and so forth. Talked to this advisor, counselor, and she's like, yeah, your GPA is pretty low. You'll need to get it up, or you might want to think about other options if you're not going to do it. I'm like, okay, so I changed it. So then from there, I started just kinesiology in general, and I was like, I can do physical training. I like still thinking about athletics, still thinking about like what I could do after college, because the mindset that we're trained to do is we go to college and develop a career and just do that for 30 years. And so like, I can do physical training. I work out. I've learned things. I can do this, get my degree, and then I can go about doing that, start a business, this whole thing, and not even know what business was or what a business entails. And so did that. And then I was in that curriculum, and it was fine. But with that, I took a intro to business class, because as part of developing your own business as a personal trainer, they wanted you to get some insight on, hey, if you're gonna do personal training, you'll likely create your own business. You'll likely have your own clients. You'll likely have to take care of all this stuff with taxes. And once you start making enough money, you pay taxes on that money. And so I took an intro to business class. I think a finance class. It was Dr. Friday was his name, and then that was a finance, like intro to finance class or something like that. And then I had who did I take intro to business with? I can't remember. I think I know who it is, but I'll just not mention the name, just because I don't remember if it was him or not. But let's say it was that person, and no, it probably was. Anyways, so then I took this intro to business class, like, this interests me, and it then turned from career and post bachelor degree to I like reading about this. I like learning about this. I don't know. Even to this day, I don't know what it is, and I'm gonna continue talking about it. But right now, it was like, I like this. I like something about reading about business in general. Because intro to business, it just had a big scope. From your management to then your human resources to then your economics to then your accounting to then finance. What else is there? Business technology. And I was like, I think this might be it. So I changed my degree again. So now I'm at music, physical therapy, personal training, now business, general business. And so then I switched that. But I felt more. But this is the most certain I had felt up until this point. Drop my pen. This is the most confident and sure I was. As far as school goes, because I still had my aspirations for being a musician and doing music. Didn't know how I was gonna go about it, but I was like, that was still in the back of my head. But I'm like, well, I'm in school and I like reading about this, so I did that. Started taking just the core curriculum for business, and then it was either my business calculus teacher or one of my finance professors. It was one of those, and they said this to the class, and it for one, I listened to them. I had a lot of awesome professors. But with that, I was like, I'll just take general business. He's like, because to me, general business is like, I can do a little bit of everything. I don't need to tie myself down because I'm not going to go use this. And at this time, I'm working retail as well. So like, it's interesting the experience I got to get while I was going to school. I was building my experience as well, with all these theories that I was learning. So then I just remember it was one of those professors. It was like it was one of two professors that mentioned like, hey, if you have the general business degree, you should consider going into a specialty. And I was like, and up until that point, I didn't want to do it. And even when she, I'm pretty sure I knew who it was, but I actually forgot her name. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, for one. For two, it didn't seem like you like that. Why? What if I don't want to do finance? What if I don't want to do accounting? What if I don't want to do human resources? It turned into one of those conversations with myself. And then along that ride, I think I took a business communication class, and I took a single leadership class. And between those two, I was like, how do I take more? So it turned into, how do I take more of those types of classes? Because it drew to me. I felt like, I can. I don't know if I can relate to it yet, but I can definitely feel like this is the direction I need to go down. So then talking to my advisor, it was a new guy. Super. He's actually really awesome. Not discouraging at all, like this other lady. Not looking back in retrospect, but he's like, management, business, management. Business. Now, there's technically a difference between business management and getting a associates in business or a bachelor's in business with a specialty in management. I don't know what the hell the difference is, but there was. And he's like, well, we don't have business management, but we have management. And I was like, okay, well, just let me do that. So I took quality of business. I took leadership. I took whatever the main curriculum. I actually finished those before I finished my general business core classes. But I had you had to take like 2 finance, 2 HR, 2 accounting, 2 of like other things, business related. But then my central degree, my specialty of learning was management. And so all these leadership classes I actually finished first. And so that was that. And then I finished, and then I graduated, and then I had my undergrad in. This is gonna bother me. Hold on. Okay, it should be okay for now. We'll see. There we go. Okay, excuse me for that little thing. So then I got my undergrad. Left the retail store. By this time, obviously, this is 2013, 2014. I'm getting ready to zip. I'm getting ready to get out. And because by this time I was already playing music as well. I started playing music 2012-ish. I started gigging and whatnot. Getting paid for gigs, at least, 2012. And so I go from business working retail to now I graduate. Now I'm able to go play music full time. Now I'm able to jump in and do this. And at the time, I was thinking about, I was talking to this artist from Dallas Fort Worth area. He's like, "Yeah, man, come up and audition. This is what we play. This is the originals. This is the covers that we do." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And I was really on board. But then Eddie. Eddie was coming back from Nashville, and he was already releasing music. And I liked the music, and he was already my friend, so that there's definitely a bias there as far as like, yeah, well, I know Eddie, like I like his music, I like the music, I want to learn it. like how great would that, because I was already looking at it as an opportunity. Eddie had already seen me play before, with other bands that I was in, or the other band that I was playing with and whatnot. But I was like, ooh, I finally, at least in my head, I was like, finally, I'm at a place where like I can move back home and I can start playing music for reals. Not that I wasn't before, it took me a little while to actually get a paying gig, but nonetheless, it still felt like that. And so, started doing that. And then, so that was 2015. And then 2016 is when I started working out, and I started playing, I had my music, the music was starting to pick up, with Eddie. But then, because he was getting ready to do all these, he was working this project, and he was working on, 17 hours, for those of you that tuned in and heard it. And then, but then I started working out. I started dropping weight. I started counting my calories. I started learning about macros. I started learning, just in general, because it was, I'm sure I brought it up, but it was Jocko 792 episode on Joe Rogan, and Denver, our guitarist, my buddy, he's like, hey man, I think you might enjoy this particular episode with Joe Rogan. Cause he already told me about Joe Rogan, so he's really the one that turned us all into like podcasts, to listen to podcasts. And I was like, hey man, who was it that you mentioned? And he's like, Jocko Willink. I'm like, okay, look it up. And that just changed, like his conversation in that one. That was his first time on with Joe Rogan, because he had been on with Tim Ferriss, but I didn't know what Tim Ferriss was yet. But listen to him, like, oh, and that just changed. I read the book, and then from that book, I started listening to Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and she was talking at this time. I forgot how old I was exactly, but she had talked about, like, at the age of 25, roughly, is when the human brain stops growing. And so I must have been like 24 at this time when I'm listening to this podcast. I'm like, oh my God, like I only have I felt like I had a limited time of reading. So then, interesting enough, I just started reading. Most of it was business books, but then I was reading whatever books Jocko was reviewing on his podcast. Then plus, I was learning about Tim Ferriss and these other business, Seth Godin, Tim Ferriss, Gary Vee. Then I started, Lewis Howes started coming up. I know I'm missing a bunch, but anyway, my point is, like, I started just opening up those doors. So it wasn't just business. It wasn't just even leadership. It wasn't just war. It was everything. It was just a bunch of things. Health, learning about fish oil and krill oil and, omega-3s, but then learning about actual macros and counting down, then trying to get my own, body fat percentage down, and how important water is, and water weight versus, obviously muscle weight. And it's all these little things that I just started jumping into. Anyway, let's just get back into the segment of the book that I just read. It all makes sense, because Seth Godin will argue that don't be a wandering generalist or wandering something, but it's tied in with being a generalist. Become a very specific. Go into a specific thing. Find your niche and run with it. And it makes sense, and I've tried, and I guess technically I have, being in music for a little while. I did that, and I was like really into like my guitar and my vocals and trying to be on pitch and, trying to sing well, play well at the same time. But then I started learning, frequencies, sound engineering, even though it was like very novice, very beginner. It was like, oh, so I was, I was learning about frequency. And then when I'm doing the sound for our band, I was, mixing and trying to make it sound the best I could for that room. And everybody has their own way of doing things, but it's, I was finding my way of doing things. So there's that. And then and then 2016, I started jiu-jitsu. The fall of 2016, I started jiu-jitsu. And that was a whole other thing of learning and opening my mind and learning how to shut off the amygdala part of my brain, where you're scared, you feel like you're gonna pass out or whatever. And you learn how to kind of hone that fear, and then you learn technique to get out of those positions or whatever. And then you start being on offense, which is that's a whole. So jiu-jitsu, music, reading books, sound engineering, all these things that have kind of added up, to me, have tied into now this book saying, hey, them as operators, and I'll never be an operator. And that's a whole different story that will come later. And frankly, it doesn't matter to me right now, because right now I like what I'm doing. Being in the healthcare field, it's like, even I've actually asked my parents. It was recently. It wasn't when I went home, but it was before that. And I was like, "You ever think I'd be doing this?" And or it's kind of, or it was something along those lines. Or I was saying, "Man, it's crazy, like what I get to do and what I get to learn now." And some of it also it ties into like Dr. Rhonda Patrick and some of the things she was doing, but that was a very specific niche that she's been longevity of the human life is basically like her niche, and mine has still revolved around a bigger picture. It's always brought me. I still been drawn back to like I say for music, it'd be sound quality. The quality of the band sounding the best I can. My guitar, I want to sound the best as well. But then when I'm out in the front and I'm listening and I'm trying to mix the group for the show, it's a whole. It's that broad. It takes me back. It allows me to have that big picture, that strategic, viewing of what's going on. And then see if I have anything else written down. Those are probably the main things that So then jujitsu, learning, and then learning how to cope with being in a stressful situation. And when you have good people to roll with, and you're learning, they rough you up, but then you learn. Oh, this is why I was able to get this on you. This is why I was, and all these things start clicking, and all these things, are going into this podcast. And now, like this podcast, at the beginning, it was a 3-person conversation, and it was cool, and it was about anything and everything. And then I started like finding like just little things that I wanted to hit, little points I wanted to hit. And then adding the music part, which I'm trying to get back to. The music never stops. But for now, I'm still trying to figure out this video to audio thing. And because of that, I have to allow myself to just pause that for a moment. I really enjoy doing those. I've already mentioned, but I want to, I want to bring some of my friends that are songwriters, music creators in general. I want to have them on, but for now, it's like this is what I need to do. Music moving with life. The conversation, that's what I want to do. But it's interesting how all those things in the past, this past 11 years have led me to this now. And then with Mike Sarraille and George Randle, with Dr. Josh Cotton, with these 3 gentlemen writing this book and writing that specific part, and those specific examples of being a generalist, something, because when you have a general picture, sometimes you can think outside the box, and if you're a specialist into that one thing, you've been doing it for 10 years, and it's like, you kind of lose sight of what's going on, which can lead to a variety of outcomes. But that's where I'm at, and I wanted to talk about it, and again, in reading this morning, I'm like, ooh, yeah, I felt a strong pull. It felt like, okay, I can talk about this. I've done things over the past 11 years that can allow me to bring this experience and try to tie it in with even this tiniest bit of the book. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll do that. And now we're here, and I'm talking about it and whatnot. But I think so. Going back to Seth Godin and being that wandering generalist versus the specific. I'll find it. Wandering generality versus a specific something. Or something specific, either way. But it's a wandering generality. But it's like, man, I've always been drawn back to that because still, and people are like, oh, you have a degree in business. Why aren't you in management? Why aren't you in business? I'm like, because I've never been drawn to business like that. And even when I worked in retail and I learned how a certain format worked, retail, I learned, at least in that store, when I learned how things were run, it's like, okay, I learned a lot. But that's where no one can take away my experience. And so now that I'm in healthcare, after playing music, it's like, everything's in patterns. When I'm asking questions to patients, or when I'm trying to do my own little investigating to see what best, I can talk to my nurse and my docs, depending on what we need to see what we need to do next and take the appropriate actions. I do tail it all into the fact that I do have a business degree. I worked in retail for 3.5, 4 years, however long it was. 4 years roughly, 3.5 years, doing that, and then working in a gym the business versus, and then training and actually training people now, learning things to train people, being the music business, playing music, learning the soundboard, learning about frequencies and how to do that. And now, and being in the healthcare system, it's like, it's all, to me, it's all just building up and adding up. And, and trying to bring my best to the table. This is where it's led me now. And, it's like, yeah. And because of that, it's like, I'll keep reading, as some of these authors, I heard this book cause they were on Jocko, I believe Mike Sarraille served with Jocko at some point. The foreword of this book was written by Jocko, at least, and they were on Jocko, so they know Jocko Willink. They're part of the Echelon Front, crew and whatnot. But again, as they release these books, and as Jocko reviews more books that I want to read, and I start hearing about them, that's why I bought this one, because the podcast is so good that I was like, oh, I need to read that book. That's definitely one of them that I want to read. So that's what led me to that. And so as long as that keeps happening, and I keep finding these things like, oh, this is me too, and hopefully to just tie this all in and close this meeting today, this conversation today, is like, it's okay to go from one thing to the next. And I will say, I think a lot of it has to do with our generation. We had the pleasure of knowing what dial-up was, but now we have Wi-Fi. And now some of these generations that have been born past the year 2000, they don't know anything but Wi-Fi. So it's like, it's okay to bounce. My argument, I guess, will be, it's okay to bounce from thing to thing as long as you're learning, as long as you're growing, as long as you're wanting to better yourself until and hopefully you do find that one thing that, you're like, oh, I want to do this, and you just kind of do it until you don't want to anymore, until you can't, or whatever the situation may be. But you find these things and you do them, and you keep growing, and by the time you know it, you're down the road, even 11 years. You're like, man, I've done something with my life so far, and because I've done something, it's like I want to keep doing. And now with this time and space in between, it's like, oh, now this next generation that's coming up is like, okay, let me try my best to start passing these little things on that I wish I would have known, even at 18, 19 years old. Things that and it's interesting because, your ego starts flaring, you start having free time, you start having your own time, your self time, you're moving away from home, you're meeting new people from all over the world, you're doing you're doing 1,000 things at once, because when you're that age, you can do that, and your brain is just firing on all cylinders at all times. But even with that, still at least getting those seeds planted. So that as they start growing and grooming, going through different things, meeting new people, and so on, the way I have, hopefully this conversation can be that seed plant, that planted seed that, will go beyond this conversation into a in-person conversation, then their own day-to-day lives, that turns into month-to-month lives, that turns into year-to-year life. So that's what I got for today. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Forgive my technical difficulties. Not that they're super technical difficulties, but until I get this figured out, then we can move on from the situation. But I hope you learned something. I definitely am glad that I was able to tie this all in and figure this out, so that I can continue reading, and maybe I'll come back with it. I don't know. Like I had said on the last podcast that I'm not gonna necessarily tie these into like the podcast or do a chapter review or anything like that. And this was not a chapter review. This is literally just a paragraph and change of something that hit me that I was like, oh, I can talk about this. This is something that I feel like I do need to bring and I do want to bring to Moving with Life, because it's relevant to what I want this podcast to be. So with that being said, take care of yourself, take care of your teams, take care of each other, mentally and physically. Look out for each other, have each other's backs, and we'll see you all very, very soon.